The morphine had stopped working. Cole Hargrove could tell by the way specialist Danny Reyes's hand had tightened around his wrist. Not hard, but with the particular desperation of a grip that knows it is running out of time. The field hospital tent outside Kandahar smelled of antiseptic and canvas and something underneath both of those things that Cole had learned not to name. Reyes was 26 years old. He had a wife's name tattooed on his left forearm, and a daughter he'd never stopped talking about, Mia, age 4, who liked the color yellow and had learned to write her own name with a purple crayon the week before Danny deployed, and who had sent him a drawing of a house with a sun above it that he had kept folded in the top pocket of his plate carrier until the carrier wasn't there anymore. The light had gone off at 06:12. It was now almost noon. The doctor had stopped adjusting things 40 minutes ago. Reyes turned his head toward Cole with the enormous effort of a man spending his last reserves on something that mattered more than comfort. His lips moved. Cole leaned in close enough to hear. "She's in Wyoming," Reyes said. "Laramie. Her name is Mia." The grip tightened one final time. "Promise me." Cole said the words. He said them clearly so that Danny Reyes would hear them and know. Then the hand went slack. Outside the tent, Ranger sat in the dust with his ears forward and his amber eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for the man he trusted most in the world to come back out. He waited a long time. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. What Cole Hargrove did next, and what he found when he got to Wyoming, will remind you of something you may have forgotten about the kind of people this country still produces. We read every single comment. Gunnery Sergeant Cole Hargrove, retired, was 40 years old, and looked like the kind of man who had been built for a specific purpose, and had spent years since the purpose ended finding other things to carry. He was broad through the chest, 6'1", with dark hair that had started coming in silver at the temples somewhere around deployment number 3, and which he had simply allowed to continue, and a jaw that looked like it had been squared with a tool. His eyes were pale steel blue, with a quality that people instinctively found difficult to read. Not cold, not warm, but precisely level. The eyes of a man who measured the distance between what was said and what was true, and who had made a professional life out of that measurement. There was a 2-inch scar along the inside of his right forearm, clean and faded, from a wire he'd caught during a night breach in Helmand Province that he'd sewn up himself with the kit from his plate carrier, because the situation had not permitted a pause. He moved through the world with the settled, almost deliberate physicality of a man who had stopped trying to demonstrate anything to anyone and had arrived at the kind of authority that doesn't announce itself. He had done 3 deployments with the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Ramadi in 2009, the Helmand River Valley in 2012, and a final rotation through Kandahar in 2015 that had ended with a Navy Cross recommendation, a fractured vertebra that healed 90% of the way, and the promise to a dying 26-year-old that had not left his chest in the 7 years since. He had come home from Kandahar and done his final year of service at Camp Pendleton, processing his medical paperwork and thinking, in the spaces between tasks, about a little girl named Mia Reyes in Laramie, Wyoming, who did not know that a man had whispered her name with his last breath and made someone else swear to look after her. Cole had been discharged in the spring of 2016 and had moved to Casper, Wyoming because it was close, and had spent 3 months doing the kind of legal and bureaucratic research that told him Mia Reyes had entered the Wyoming state foster care system at age 5 after Danny's death, and had been placed with a family named Pruitt in the town of Granger, 40 miles east of Laramie, and that the case was listed as active and monitored, which was what the paperwork said, and which was not the same thing as the paperwork being true. Cole was not a man who talked about the promise often. He had told no one about it except Ranger, who had been there, and who had heard the words through the canvas tent wall, and had sat in the dust outside until Cole had come out and put a hand on Ranger's head, and stood there for a long time without speaking. Ranger was a 5-year-old German shepherd with a coat so dense along the back and haunches that it moved like a second animal when the wind hit it. Rich amber fading to black at the ears and down the ridge of his spine, the coloring deep and warm as dying light on a field. He weighed 86 pounds. He had a titanium tooth, the left upper canine, replaced after a hard surface impact during a compound clearance in Helmand in 2013 that it snapped the original. And the replacement caught light in a way the others didn't. A small metal fact that told a specific story if you knew what you were looking at. Along his left flank, beneath the thick coat, a 6-inch scar ran in a diagonal from behind his shoulder toward his ribs. The remnant of a fragmentation hit from the same eye that had taken Danny Reyes. Ranger had been 20 feet farther back on the road. 20 feet had been the difference. He had limped for 6 weeks, and then stopped limping, and had never, as far as Cole could tell, spent another moment on the subject. He moved with the clean, unhurried confidence of a working dog who has come to understand that his handler's attention is the most relevant information in any given environment, and who calibrates everything else from there. He rode in the passenger seat of Cole's truck with his head up and his eyes forward, and his ears rotating with the slow, systematic sweep of satellite dishes that have been tasked with something important. Cole had adopted Ranger through the military working dog program, 18 months after Kandahar, at the end of a process that had required 17 phone calls, 4 forms, 2 congressional inquiries through his Veterans Services contact, and 1 in-person appearance at a kennel facility in San Antonio, where a handler sergeant had looked at Cole for a long moment, and then said, with the air of someone resolving a long internal debate, "He's been waiting." Cole had driven him home to Casper in 1 straight shot, 19 hours, stopping only for fuel, with Ranger in the seat beside him, making a sound Cole had not heard before. Not a whine, not a bark, but a low, continuous exhalation that he eventually understood was the sound of a dog that had finally stopped bracing for something. They had been together for 5 years. Cole had not yet found Mia Reyes. He had tried. He had written to the Wyoming Department of Family Services 4 times. He had been told, each time, that he was not a legal guardian or family member, and that case information was not available to him. He had hired an attorney for 4 months, and had been told that without a legal relationship to the child, access was limited to what the system chose to share. He had driven to Granger twice, the first time in the fall of 2018 and the second time in the spring of 2020, and had sat in his truck on the county road outside a property that matched the address he'd found in public records, watching a house that looked like no one had painted it recently, and a yard with no toys in it, and a car in the driveway that hadn't moved in 3 days. He had not gone to the door. He had not yet had a reason strong enough to justify it. The law was the law, and Cole Hargrove was not a man who broke things when he still had legal options. In October of 2022, a woman named Sandra Pruitt, no relation to the Foster family, filed a complaint with the Wyoming Department of Family Services alleging neglect at the Granger placement. Sandra Pruitt was a school librarian at Granger Elementary who had been watching a specific 11-year-old girl for 3 years, with the growing certainty that something was wrong, and the growing frustration of a system that had reviewed the case twice and closed it both times. The girl came to school in clothing that was too thin for October in Wyoming. She ate her lunch slowly and completely, the way children eat when they are not certain of the next meal. She did not talk about her home. She was polite and careful and read every book Sandra put in front of her, and she had a quality that Sandra had spent 3 years trying to name. A kind of watchfulness that looked in a child like something it should never have to look like. Like someone who had learned very early to take up as little space as possible. Her name was Mia Reyes. She was 11 years old. She had a drawing, folded and refolded until the creases were almost tears, of a house with a sun above it. She had drawn it herself, from memory, to replace the one her father had kept. Nobody had told her that he'd kept it. Nobody had told her much about her father at all. What she had been told by the Pruitt placement family in the first year was that her father had left letters for her, but that the address he'd sent them to was wrong, and that they had never arrived. This was the lie that had lived inside Mia Reyes for 6 years. The letters existed. There were 41 of them, written by Danny Reyes in the 14 months between Mia's birth and his second and final deployment, stored on a shelf in a closet in the Pruitt house in Granger in a shoebox that no one had mailed. The Pruitts were not cruel people in the broad cinematic sense. They were people who had made a small, convenient decision about a letterbox in 2016 and who had lived inside that decision for 6 years, the way people live inside small decisions that have grown too large to reverse. Cole Hargrove received a call in the first week of October from his attorney, who had been tracking the DF's complaint filed by Sandra Pruitt. The complaint had triggered a formal review. The review had flagged 3 prior unaddressed concerns. Cole listened to all of this and then said that he would be in Granger by the end of the week. He was there in 2 days. The morning Cole arrived, the caseworker assigned to the Pruitt placement, a county employee named Derek Vogel, who had managed a caseload of 47 children across 3 counties for the past 4 years, and who had reviewed the Reyes placement twice without flagging it, was at the Pruitt house for what he had been told was a routine welfare check. The Pruitts had called him the previous evening. Cole did not know this yet. He parked on the county road at 7:40 in the morning and walked to the front door with Ranger at his left knee. The air was the specific cold of Wyoming in mid-October. Not yet the killing cold, but the earnest cold. The kind that smells of frozen grass and reminds you, in its directness, that the season has made a decision and will not be argued with. Ranger moved through the brown grass with his ears forward and his nose working in wide, continuous arcs. At the porch steps he paused. His tail, which had been level, dropped slightly. He turned his head to look at Cole once, then back to the door. Cole knocked. Derek Vogel opened it. There was a moment, brief, with the particular frozen quality of 2 people who have each arrived at a scene for different reasons and are now recalibrating, in which Cole and the caseworker looked at each other. Vogel was a thick-set man in his late 30s with the tired, defensive expression of someone who has spent years managing a problem he has never had the resources to properly fix, and who has made his peace with outcomes he doesn't fully investigate. He looked at Cole the way people look at things they weren't expecting that immediately complicate the situation they were managing. "Can I help you?" Vogel said. "I'm here about Mia Reyes," Cole said. Behind Vogel, at the end of a narrow hallway, a door opened slightly. A thin face in the gap, dark eyes. Then the door pulled back almost, but not all the way closed. Vogel stepped onto the porch, pulling the door mostly shut behind him. His voice dropped. "This placement is under active review. You need to go through DFS channels." "Who are you?" Cole told him. He gave his name, his rank, his branch, his years of service. He explained the nature of his relationship to Danny Reyes, the deployment, the field hospital, the words at the end. He said this plainly and completely, the way he had practiced saying it for 7 years. Vogel listened with the expression of a man who is listening and simultaneously preparing his next objection. That's a compelling personal story, Vogel said. But it doesn't give you legal standing. You're not family. You're not a guardian. I'm aware, Cole said. I'm also aware that the complaint filed by Sandra Pruitt cites nutritional neglect, inadequate clothing, and 2 previously unaddressed concerns. I'm asking to see Mia Reyes with you present, in a supervised capacity, so that she knows that her father did not forget her. That's all I'm here to do. Vogel's jaw worked. Ranger, at Cole's knee, sat down. His amber eyes moved from Vogel to the door, and back again, slow and deliberate, and he did not look away. The Pruitt family, Warren and Deanne, both in their 50s, were in the kitchen. Warren was a man who had gone soft in the shoulders and hard in the eyes, the particular combination of a person who has not been told no enough times. Deanne kept her arms crossed and spoke in the practiced, preemptive tone of someone who has been explaining themselves to authorities for a long time and has developed a script for it. They had taken foster placements for 11 years. The monthly stipend for Mia's placement was $820. They had not, as far as Cole could determine from what Sandra Pruitt's complaint documented, spent a visible portion of it on the child. Warren Pruitt looked at Cole in the kitchen doorway and said, "This man has no business being in this house. I want him out." Cole looked at him for a moment in the particular way that Cole looked at things he had fully understood. "I'm not going to be a problem to you," Cole said. "I'm going to stand here while Mr. Vogel does his job." Ranger had moved to the doorway of the hallway. He was not blocking it. He was simply present at it, large and still, with a quality of attention that is not aggression but that carries, unmistakably, the message that the situation has been assessed and a judgment has been reached. His ears were up. His tail was level. He watched Warren Pruitt without blinking. Warren Pruitt sat back down. What Derek Vogel did in the next 40 minutes, whether from the weight of Cole's presence or Sandra Pruitt's complaint, or some personal accounting that had been accumulating for longer than anyone present knew, was his job, fully, and without the usual shortcuts. He spoke with Mia Reyes alone in the room she'd been given, which was small and cold and held a single bed and a shelf of library books and almost nothing else. He documented what he saw. He asked the questions the protocol required. When he came out of the room, he made a phone call to his supervisor. The call lasted 6 minutes. When it was over, he told the Pruitts that Mia would be leaving with him today for an emergency placement review. Deanne Pruitt said, "You can't do this." Vogel said, "I can and I am." It was then that Warren Pruitt made a decision that revealed the precise shape of his character. He went to the hallway closet and came back with the shoebox. He set it on the kitchen table. "She knows about these," he said, which was false. "We were going to give them to her when she was old enough," which was also false. "We kept them safe." He said this last thing with the particular look of a man converting a piece of evidence against himself into a defense at the last possible moment, when the moment was already past. Cole looked at the shoebox. He looked at the 41 envelopes, each addressed in Danny Reyes's handwriting, the forward slant, the slightly too large capital letters, to a daughter who had grown up 200 miles from where her father had sent them, believing they had never arrived. Cole did not pick up the shoebox. He was not certain, in that moment, that he could pick it up and maintain the steadiness that the situation required. He stepped into the hallway. He knocked on the door of Mia's room. He heard nothing. And then he heard a small sound that was not quite a word. He opened the door. She was sitting on the edge of her bed with her coat on. She had put it on herself. Already, she was 11 years old and thin, and had her father's dark eyes and the careful, compact posture of a child who had learned that stillness was a form of safety. She looked at Cole. She looked at Ranger, who had come to stand in the doorway at Cole's knee with his ears soft and his tail making a single, slow arc. Cole sat down on the floor in front of her, which put his eyes below hers, and told her his name. He told her that he had known her father. He told her that he had been with him at the end, that Danny Reyes had used his last strength to say her name and to make Cole promise that he would find her and make sure she was all right. He told her that he had been trying to find her for 7 years and that he was sorry it had taken this long, and that her father had not forgotten her for a single day. He said this steadily, without performance. He had said it in his head, in different versions, for 7 years, and the version that came out was plain and true and exactly enough. Mia Reyes looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Ranger. "Is he a veteran too?" she asked. "Yes," Cole said. She put out her hand very carefully, and Ranger stepped forward and pressed the top of his head into her palm and stayed there. The emergency placement review took 11 days. Cole Hargrove had spent 4 years working quietly with a family law, attorney, and a veterans advocacy organization based in Cheyenne on the question of whether a non-family member with documented long-term caregiving intent could establish legal guardianship of a child in the Wyoming foster system. The answer, the attorney had told him, was yes, under specific conditions, with DFS cooperation, and with evidence of a prior relationship to the child's parent. Cole had that evidence. He had Danny Reyes's service record, his own deployment documentation, a sworn affidavit from the field hospital physician who had been present that night in Kandahar, and a letter from Danny's commanding officer confirming the relationship. He had been building this case for 4 years while the legal route remained open. The DF's cooperation arrived in the form of Derek Vogel's formal recommendation, which was the most useful thing Derek Vogel had done in the Reyes case, and which Cole acknowledged without irony because the situation required moving forward, not accounting. The Pruitts were removed from the foster placement registry in Wyoming in December. A subsequent review of their 11-year foster placement history identified 3 additional cases with flagged concerns that had been administratively closed. The review remained open. Cole Hargrove was granted legal guardianship of Mia Reyes on the 15th of January, on a Tuesday morning in a Laramie courtroom, with a family law judge named Honorable Patricia Sato, who read the file carefully and asked Cole 3 direct questions, and appeared, when she signed the order, to permit herself one precise, brief expression of something that was not judicial neutrality. By the following spring, Mia Reyes was living in a 2-bedroom house in Casper, Wyoming, attending a school where Sandra Pruitt had written her a letter of introduction to the school librarian and reading every book she could find about the Marine Corps. She had a shelf in her room where 41 letters sat in their envelopes in the order Danny Reyes had written them, organized by date. She had read all of them. She had read them slowly, one at a time, over the course of 3 months, the way you read something that has to last. She did not rush. On the last day of March, Ranger lay in the yard in the afternoon light with his head up and his ears working the spring air, and Mia sat in the grass beside him with a book in her lap that she was not reading, and Cole sat on the back porch steps with a cup of coffee and watched the 2 of them without saying anything, and understood that the word promise was not a word he needed to carry the same way anymore. Danny Reyes had sent 41 letters to his daughter. Every one of them arrived. Sometimes the promise that matters most is not the dramatic one, not the one witnessed by crowds or recorded in history. Sometimes it is the one whispered in a canvas tent in the Afghan dust by a man who is out of time and knows it, to the one person still in the room. God places people at the edge of terrible moments, not to spare them, but to give them something to carry forward. Cole Hargrove carried a name for 7 years. He carried it through bureaucratic walls and legal dead ends, and 2 drives down a county road where he sat outside a house and did not yet have the right reason to knock. He did not put the name down. That is not stubbornness. That is the particular form of faithfulness that does not announce itself and does not require witnesses and does not stop when it becomes inconvenient. Danny Reyes died at 26 in a tent outside Kandahar. He died with his hand on the wrist of a man who kept his word. Some promises are too important to be left to the mercy of paperwork. Some children are too important to be left to the mercy of people who should have done better. And sometimes, God works through the ones who refuse to believe that the door is permanently closed, who knock again, and again, and again, until it opens. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that promises still mean something and that some people still keep them. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever known someone who refused to stop fighting for a child or for someone who couldn't fight for themselves, we want to hear that story too. Your words may be the encouragement someone else needs to keep knocking. If you believe in loyalty, in service, and in the grace that moves through ordinary people who refuse to quit, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next journey. May God bless you, protect your family, and hold close every child who is waiting to be found. And may He guide safely home every person who made a promise in a dark place and kept it.